What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and it's been a minute since we've got a good video game beef. Well, that's all about to change because we just found out today that Sony is actually suing Tencent over trademark infringement involving one of their games. And obviously, since I'm making this video, I want to talk about it. So without further ado, let's rock. And honestly, lawsuits between video game developers, or in this case publishers, isn't a brand new thing. It actually hasn't been that long since we talked about Nintendo suing Pocket Pair over Palworld, which ironically, the game in question, Light of Motiram, which I'm not even sure if that's how you pronounce it, but that's what I'm going with, actually has a tie to Palworld, at least in my opinion. But what actually makes this particular lawsuit potentially more explosive is the fact that in the Palworld lawsuit, which is still going on, by the way, it felt like, at least in my opinion, it felt like Nintendo was kind of punching down, because Pocket Pair, I don't think Palworld was technically its first game, but it was a kind of small time developer taking a big swing with Palworld. And so it kind of felt like Nintendo, this giant company in the video game space, was kind of punching down, suing Pocket Pair. Well, Sony and Tencent, on the other hand, and if I might be misremembering this, so don't exactly quote me on this, I feel like those two are like, not only are they huge multimedia, like global companies, but they might be 1 and 2 as far as revenue is concerned in the video game space alone. So these are giant companies, especially when it comes to video games. So depending on how this lawsuit goes down, it could be potentially explosive for the video game space. But let's back up a little bit for those that aren't aware of this game, which honestly, it really wasn't on my radar. I vaguely remember hearing something about this when it was first revealed, but it wasn't something that I was keeping my eye on. Light of Motiram was revealed late last year. It is a free-to-play base building survival game, which coincidentally reminds me very much of Palworld, which I think is honestly the craziest thing about this entire saga, is the fact that not only did they clearly rip off one game, they kind of ripped off the playbook from Pocket Pair. Yeah, you can argue that Pocket Pair and Palworld ripped off Pokemon. Nintendo is clearly arguing that as we speak. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Some of them are very, very familiar. But at the very least, it felt like Palworld had its own gameplay. Like they were trying to bring something else to the table. So at least you could make the argument that a lot of their creatures were in homage to Pokemon, because it was a completely different game outside of the creatures. Light of Motiram is literally ripping off one game while also ripping off the playbook of another developer. Honestly, Pocket Pair might also have a lawsuit here. They will never do it because A, it'd be very hard to prove. Also, it wouldn't really look all that good considering they're still trying to litigate their lawsuit as we speak. I just think it's funny that Tencent had literally no original ideas going into this game. Light of Motiram takes place in a post-apocalyptic world overrun by giant robot dinosaurs. Should already remind you of a certain game. But to make matters worse, the protagonist is a red-haired woman dressed in a strikingly similar way. And it doesn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together. I mean, almost immediately when they dropped this reveal trailer for Light of Motiram, people were immediately commenting like this feels like a carbon copy of Horizon. And we're going to actually touch on what Sony said in the lawsuit here in a second, but they actually cite that as evidence. Like literally people were immediately making this comparison that essentially this game is a ripoff of one of their bigger franchises. But in my opinion, what makes this even scummier is the fact that Light of Motiram is actually scheduled to come out on mobile. So I think that they thought they could kind of get one over on Sony and release a game that clearly looks like Horizon mobile game, and people might actually buy it thinking that it's a Horizon mobile game and kind of cash grab on that. And much like Palworld, people just immediately assumed Sony was going to drop the lawsuit hammer down on Tencent. But much like that lawsuit, Sony kind of took their time, just like Nintendo did, almost to the point where I was thinking that they weren't going to sue them. Very much like I didn't think Nintendo was going to sue Pocket Pair. So the similarities are pretty striking here. But eventually, obviously, since I'm making this video, they did eventually sue Tencent. And the details are actually pretty hilarious. All right, so let's dig into the details of the lawsuit. I'm looking at an IGN article. I will link that full article in the video description. I'm not going to read it word for word. You can check it out for yourself if you're interested. But basically, it summarizes a lot of what I just told you. Basically, they think that this game, rightfully so, as we saw the trailer here a little bit ago, that Light of Motiram is illegally similar to Horizon Forbidden West and Horizon Zero Dawn, not only from creature design to protagonists, but also the marketing materials as well. And they actually, one thing I wanted to bring up is the complaint also cites headlines from a number of gaming websites, including Kotaku, The Gamer, and GameRank, as well as various Steam and Reddit comments. So Redditors are actually doing a good thing in this particular case, that all remark on the similarities between the two games and the likelihood that Sony would probably sue over the issues. So moving on, this is what I found super interesting. Is per Sony's complaint, Tencent allegedly knew exactly what they were doing here. Sony says that Tencent began developing Light of Motiram in 2023 and approached Sony at the 2024 Game Developers Conference to ask for a licensing deal to develop its own Horizon game. So literally, Tencent was already developing this game for, I don't know if it was exactly a year, but they started in 2023 and they approached Sony in 2024 saying, hey, we're doing this thing. We're really interested in Horizon, kind of making our own Horizon game. Are you interested in a licensing deal? And Sony was like, nah, brah, we good. But they just kept going. Tencent kept developing Light of Motiram anyways. Sony also claims that it approached Tencent informally to resolve the copyright dispute. So Sony tried to settle this outside of filing this lawsuit, which I think is interesting, because it was aware that Tencent was still developing this game. But when it did so, Sony says Tencent tried once again to license Horizon. Sony again said, nah, we good. And Tencent allegedly moved forward the game's promotions and playtests, regardless of the fact that they knew they were potentially breaking the law. I think that's absolutely wild that they were just like, we know exactly what we're doing, and we're just gonna do it anyways. Of course, I'm no lawyer, but this feels like a slam dunk case to me. Logically, if this is not trademark infringement, I don't know what is. Based on what we just learned, Tencent clearly knew what they were doing. They wanted to make a Horizon game. Sony didn't want them to make a Horizon game. They tried to make a Horizon game anyways. And people immediately picked up on the fact that they were trying to rip Horizon off. So if this is not trademark infringement, I don't know what is. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because, like I said, these are giant companies and they're fighting. Who really cares? My biggest thought when I first heard this is, what about the people that are just developing this game? Are they potentially going to lose their job because of this? Now, ultimately, I don't think it was their fault. They probably were told by their corporate overlords to make a Horizon game. and then they would work out all the other details later. So it's not necessarily their fault. I'd be more worried about the common working man, that they might be out of a job, because as we've learned over the last couple of years, it is extremely hard to get a video game developing job. And so I would be really worried about them versus like these two giant companies fighting it out over trademark infringement. That part doesn't necessarily mean that much to me. I am a little bit worried, at least more worried about the developers potentially losing their job because of this. But I also am kind of curious to see how this and the Palworld lawsuit, which I do think the two are very different. I mean, the games are very similar, but I mean, I think the lawsuits, at least in my opinion, and again, I'm not a lawyer, they do seem to be a little bit different, just because at least Palworld tried to make a different game. It feels like Light of Motiram is just literally a carbon copy of Horizon. So I'm curious to see if the Palworld lawsuit and now this lawsuit will kind of make other companies thinking about doing something similar kind of stop in their tracks, and maybe we'll get more original content moving forward. But as always, those are just my thoughts on this lawsuit. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. Of course, I hope that you liked this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate if you smash that like button, as the kids say. If you especially like this video, which I have a feeling that you did if you're this far in the video, and you haven't already, definitely consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, ding that bell. That way you're notified every time I post another video. I try to post weekly gaming related content, so if you like that content, definitely consider subscribing and dinging that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy. And we were just talking, and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?